Hi, I'm Sue Fairchild, professional editor for the Christian Market. I don't change voices, I make them louder, and here's how.
Today we're going to be talking about prologues, talking about whether or not prologues are dead. Okay, you may have heard that, especially if you're in the writing industry, that if you send something to a publisher and you have a prologue, they immediately say, "Nope, we don't want it because prologues are dead. Prologues, no one reads prologues anymore." Well, I'm here to say that I don't agree with that. I enjoy a good prologue. But today we're going to talk about what a prologue is and isn't and what makes a good prologue. So first I want to talk about that you have to do a prologue right. And what do I mean by that? So first let's define prologue, okay? Prologue comes at the beginning of your book. If you're unfamiliar, you might be familiar with an epilogue that comes at the end. So that's usually like a tying up of loose ends. People really get epilogues a lot better than they do prologues. Epilogues is kind of this like tying up of loose ends. You want to know what happened to all the characters after the fact, after the story ends, right? So prologue is kind of sometimes what happens to those characters before your story starts. It's really kind of as simple as that, but it has to be done correctly. So Merriam-Webster's defines the word prologue this way: an introductory or preceding event or development to a story. An introductory or preceding event or development to a story. Now, you'll notice what it is not. So prologue is not an information dump. So this is not the place to give all of your characters flaws, what happened to them, their entire life up until this moment in your story. This is not a time to give all of the information about their likes and dislikes and what time frame we're in, what time period we're in, and where they live and what they wear. And it's not a time for information dump, okay? Remember, it is an introductory or preceding event or development to a story. It's a preceding event or development to a story, okay? So no information dump. I like to use the for people because I know everybody knows Star Wars, right? I mean, my husband hasn't watched it, but he knows the basic concept, right? So, and I love Star Wars, so don't come at me for if you think I'm being negative about Star Wars. I'm not. I'm just trying to make a point here. So every Star Wars movie starts with the scrolling text, right? Especially the first picture, the first episode. Well, it's not the first episode. You all know what I mean. Where we're introduced to the characters, 74, whenever it came out, 75. And we're the scrolling text. Now, that scrolling text is different than every other movie, right? So it does draw the person in, does draw the watcher in, okay? However, the text within that scrolling text is an information dump. Don't come at me, Star Wars people. I love Star Wars. But technically, if that were written, it would be an information dump and probably not needed. If you were to take that out of the movies and watch the movies without that, and I don't know how you would gauge this because just about everyone except my husband has watched Star Wars. But if you took that out and asked somebody to watch the initial movie and asked them what was going on, they would get the gist of it without that information. So it's unneeded, okay? In my opinion, it's not needed. In some of the other movies, it is needed probably to give a little backstory, whatever. But technically, that's an information dump. That is not what a prologue should be. Think about also that it's not a time to explain a bunch of stuff. So that kind of like goes right along with information dump. It's not a time to explain everything. It's not, if you don't think a reader is going to get your story based on what you've written, you need to refine your story. You need to work on how you've written your story so that they do get it. Because if you feel there has to be an entire first chapter that explains what is going to happen, you've not written a good novel. Okay, I'm here to be harsh and honest. You don't want to just try and give everything away in this prologue. You don't want to say, well, here's why I wrote it, or here's what's going to happen, or here's why this happened, or no. This goes back to show and not tell. Okay, see my other video or my other blog. It's not about just telling the reader everything. A prologue should not be about telling the reader everything, explaining everything. It is a moment in time. I'm going to get to what it is. But a third thing that it is not is a synopsis of the book. Okay, so these three kind of go hand in hand. It's not an information dump. It's not just you explaining what's going on. And it is not a synopsis of the book. That is boring. You don't want to give away any of your secrets. You don't want to give away the plot. You don't want to give away the special magic chalice that the main character has to find. You don't want to do that in the prologue. All right, so if it isn't a bunch of unwanted information and explanation and synopsis of your book, what is a prologue? Okay, so it should highlight a different perspective, perhaps. It should give a reader perspective. It should kind of dig deeper. So let's think about, some people say that the first Harry Potter book should have used chapter 1 as the prologue. So I invite you to go and pick up the first Harry Potter book, read chapter 1, and get a good indication then of what a prologue should be. Consider George R.R. Martin's prologue in Game of Thrones. In that, he sets up a host of characters and that all get axed, right? So it's not so much that he is doing character development during that prologue, because you do invest in those characters. You do, when you start to read a book and you're reading about characters, you get invested, right? However, he's setting up the world in his prologue. So, okay, he's setting up, this is what happens in my world, but he's not giving an information dump. He isn't just explaining things. He's still in the moment. He's still in a particular moment. He's still building a story, but it's only a 1-chapter story, okay? And he is setting up his world in that way by not, but not by just giving all the information. Okay, you're still building a story in a prologue. You're still trying to have a certain moment in time. I think the best prologues, technically, like George R. Martin's works well, and I think that most of them that I have seen a good prologue, it often does not have the same main character. It often does not have the same point of view. So it often is from either a different character or someone completely not even in the novel. So take, for instance, if you have a young adult series that your main character is like a 16-year-old girl, whatever, and her father passed away many years ago. And this is why she now tries to solve crimes. Because his death remains unsolved. Your prologue might be his death from years ago and how that affected her in such a way that now this is what she does. Okay, that's a good prologue, but it still has to be told with good writing. It still is not an information dump. It is still just not explaining information. You'd be like in the moment where he was killed, possibly from his perspective where he doesn't even know who killed him, or maybe she was present during that time as a younger child and didn't see who killed him. Maybe she cowered under something or hid away somewhere. You're still telling a story, but I think the best ones work not in the same moment. It's usually prior, like sometimes years prior. Think about, as I was thinking about this video, and I have a blog post about this as well. I was thinking about the Chosen series. If you're unfamiliar with that, or probably if you're not a Christian, you might not have heard of it. The Chosen series is about the life of Christ. It starts when he is in his 30s and his ministry is beginning. and where he's calling his disciples, and he is starting healing people and calling people, to his Father. But there are beginnings of some of those episodes where there are scenes that are actually taken from the Old Testament. So the Old Testament, but they're told in like the moment of the Old Testament. It's not like Jesus is remembering or one of the disciples is remembering, or it is told in that moment from the Old Testament that relates to the moment that's in the episode. So Jesus told certain parables, and he talked about certain prophecies that came from the Old Testament. It came from things that these people, the Jewish people, knew about by reading about it, or from the oral history of it. So it starts, a lot of this episodes start with these little vignettes almost. You could think of a prologue as a vignette of a separate time that starts with these little vignettes of, okay, here's why Jesus then taught about this. Here's why this happened then many years later, is because of this moment from the Old Testament from hundreds, sometimes years ago. But it's still told. It's not just told. There's not just words on a screen. Sorry, George Lucas. It's not just words on a screen. It's not just the scripture. It's not just, it is still a moment in time. It's still developed as a story, that little moment. You're still creating those characters. You're still building that story. You're still developing that, whole thing in a prologue. But it only lasts for one chapter. It only lasts for about maybe 2,000 words. So you're giving a different perspective about why the current character in your current novel is doing what they're doing, or experiencing what they're experiencing. Or you may never see those characters again from the prologue, but they're still affecting the current characters in your book. I hope that makes sense. So in the end, if you want to use a prologue, I would suggest these things. Be sure it is written just as well as the rest of your book. It's not a throwaway chapter. It is not just this information dump or definitions or word definitions or why words mean this or what your world is about. Be sure it's just as well written. You still have to think about plot and consistency and character development. Make sure you engage the reader, create an interesting hook. Your hook is it's the first chapter. It's the prologue. It's the first thing they read. And I hope they do read it. Make it so that if they skip it, they're confused. Make it so people want to read prologues again. I love a good prologue. I'm sorry. I love a good prologue. And offer something of substance, something of value that pertains to your story. It should connect to your story in such a way that if you didn't have it, you would be a little lost. You would have to try and figure out what's going on. So again, if you create a prologue that gives more than it takes, i.e. if it doesn't take of your reader's time, they're actually engaged in the novel right away, then you've done it correctly. I found a great website that has some examples that I'm going to link down below in the description. So make sure you check all those out and start looking at a critical eye to like books you read and movies that you watch and TV shows that you watch, because a lot of them use prologue as a scene. You just might not realize they're a prologue because, on screen, it's not listed as a prologue. But often movies are utilizing them, and I do think they're important. I do think they're valuable if they're done correctly. And so I hope that you will consider, if you're kind of on the fence, creating a prologue if you think your story needs one, or not just saying chapter one, actually creating a prologue. And if you run against a publisher that says prologues are dead, then you'll have an arsenal. You'll have an arsenal to say, well, George R.R. Martin used a prologue, and this person used a prologue, and they've done it correctly, and I think I've done it correctly. So you'll have some like ammunition, you understand, to fight back against that, because prologues, in my opinion, are important and can be used if done properly. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope that you will continue to like and share my videos. And please, give me some comments down below. If you know of a great book that has a great prologue, let me know in the comments, because I want to check it out and use it as an example as well. And be sure to click the bell so that you get notifications for all my upcoming videos. And I have all of my social media links down below. So I hope that you utilize them and connect with me. Talk to you soon.